Hey, it's the franchise Shane Douglas. Welcome back to the latest edition of Appalachian Expose. And I got one of my original boys here from ECW. Tommy Turner, great to have you here, brother.
Hell to be here, man. I love it. Love to sit around and talk to you. Had a good little day today.
Yeah.
We spoke to Terry Funk in the car ride and get to hang out with the franchise Shane Douglas. Is a good day for me.
And can completely debunk any online rumors or whatever. The Funker is still the Funker. His voice is a little bit raspy. He had a cold or something, but we laughed for, 10, 15 minutes in the car just listening to him and his stories. So
Smart as a whip, man. He's just on cue with Shane Douglas because Shane is very quick-witted, and the Funker is quick-witted as well. And also I told him about how AEW outsold WWE. And he just went on this entire, like, how the business is, and he's so with it. It's great to hear him. And yes, to debunk all the rumors, Terry Funk is fine.
Yeah, and like Moose said earlier, literally everything that came out of his mouth was solid gold, right? Just completely typical Terry Funk. So dispel those rumors. The Funker's doing great. 77 years old and tougher than all of us put together. But what we do here, Tommy, is we sort of bullshit a little bit and go into, the same stuff we do in the cars, right? When you first meet somebody, asking you how'd you break into the business, who trains you, that kind of thing, and go down. I know a little bit about your background. I'm going to delve into those to refresh my memory. Let's start with your parents. I mean, you grew up in Yonkers, New York.
Yep.
Your parents are both involved in public education, correct?
Absolutely. My father was a teacher, then he became a principal, then he became a superintendent of schools.
Nice.
It was for back then they would call it mentally challenged, delinquent kids.
Yep.
He had a lot of famous people that he helped out throughout the years. He had some other people who not so famous or infamous, like the son of Sam was.
Really?
He taught him.
Wow.
My father had 5 masters. My father was brilliant. He loved education. He loved. I didn't know he had 5 masters until he died, and I was like, Mom, why didn't you tell me?
Yeah.
My mom, she worked as an executive, but she also was a substitute teacher, filling for like different spots. But she was mainly a housewife to me and my sister. And I had, when I tell you, a perfect upbringing. I had 2 loving parents, and my mom still is alive. My dad's gone, but they supported me in anything I wanted to do. I had a perfect upbringing. I don't know why I'm so messed up. No.
Well, I remember back in the early days of ECW, we'd come to your house quite often, and I would sit and have conversations with your mom and dad, but mostly your dad. And it was very clear how intelligent he was and how passionate he was about education.
Yep.
And he knew that I had been a teacher, was still involved, dabbling at that time in teaching. And he just went on and on about the accolades of public education. And the other part is, I just knowing your dad, the little bit that I did, I'm going to take a wild stab in the dark and say that he was probably a different kind of administrator than we probably see in public education today.
Yeah, it's also, different times. I remember, we all talk about your dads or your heroes.
Yeah.
or stuff like that. I remember a kid acted up and he swung at my dad. And my dad was big too,
Yeah.
and I remember my dad throttled him by the throat, picked him up, and I remember seeing the guy's feet. And my father went left jab, which made him drop the guy, and as he dropped him, he uppercutted him and dropped him, and that was okay.
Yeah.
But because kid swung at a teacher,
I'm sure.
or he was actually the principal at the time. Kids swung at a principal.
Yeah.
So it was a lot different, and it was just before the time of security guards and all that
Right.
stuff, and at times teachers had to fend for
Sure.
themselves. So he was different, but my father, he always wanted to help people, and he believed in people. Like back in the day, the system would give up on you.
Yeah.
If my father would always say, people back then would say, oh, they're crazy, or they would be like, there's just something wrong with them.
Slow.
Or
Right.
slow, retarded.
Right,
These were all
right.
common terms
Yeah.
back then. But my father was like, no, like there's something medically wrong with them, or people just being depressed.
Sure.
And like depression isn't just a thing where, I wake up
Right.
sad. It's
Come on, be happy.
a chemical imbalance.
Yeah.
And they would just like deem you, all right, this kid, or ADD, this kid can't pay attention, and they would just cast them away.
Yeah.
But my father believed in helping out people, and he did, and he had so many success stories. And just like I said, he loved learning, he loved helping other people. And I think I get that quality from him, which is cool. And it was weird, like I remember the first match I ever agented was, I guess, Beulah versus Bill Alfonso. And he would be like, Tommy, you're very, very good at explaining stuff and making people feel comfortable. Like, you're a hell of a teacher
Yeah.
when it comes to dealing with things that I know. I don't know much, but I know about wrestling.
Right.
And I took that as a big compliment. And I never saw that until Fonzie taught me that. I was like, yeah, like, I mean, I can't be a teacher for wrestling, but I could teach from experience.
Right.
And that's kind of what my dad did too. I mean, he grew up in Brooklyn, and it was across the street from a church, and he was an altar boy. And he's like, I used to be sleeping, and a priest would wake me up. He goes, and make me work the 6 o'clock mass.
Yeah.
And he goes, if I said no, they'd slap the shit out of me. Because back then, that stuff was tolerated, and it's not tolerated anymore.
Right.
I do still feel if a kid swings at a teacher, that teacher should beat the living crap out of
Yeah.
them. But that's different philosophies.
Sure. Well, I think the reason your dad and I had a commonality, other than just an extremely interesting person to talk to, was that I was at that time my first teaching job for the first 2 years was in special education, and I was right on the cusp of when it went from it was emotionally disabled
Yep.
to emotional support class. So they were
Yes.
changing the nomenclatures and things. How long was your dad in public education?
His whole life. It's weird, man. His father was an Irish immigrant who came here with nothing, and he wanted my father to be a doctor, because back then you were either a doctor or a lawyer. My dad did 3 years of medical school. He also was a reserve in the Army for Korea.
Wow.
And the whole time while that, he didn't like it, but he did it because his father wanted him to do it.
Sure.
And still learning. But that whole time he was substitute teaching to earn income. He had a family.
Mm-hmm.
And then he also would go to night school. And then after he basically told his father, I don't want to do this anymore, he was like, well, you have to be a lawyer. And then he did 2 years of law school while teaching, while doing that. So
Yeah.
again, but it's all this knowledge.
Yep.
The biggest thing I say regret-wise, like when he got older, I said, dude, you should go to Jeopardy, because he would watch that show and bang up all the answers, and I was like,
Yeah.
get off your ass and friggin', you're so smart.
Yeah.
But he's like, He kind of reminds me of the dad from the Goldbergs.
Yeah.
That time, it was just like, he loved his family, but he loved education, he loved helping people. But he was just so, and like you wanted to go to medical school
Yep.
too, and he just couldn't get enough knowledge.
Yeah. Well, there is an insatiable appetite for that kind of. That's why I still love to read. I'm a voracious reader, but only on things that I'm interested in. If you give me a book about something that I'm not interested in, it's a slog. Just a little side note to supplant what you said about your dad. Whenever I was in middle school, I remember we had one of our classmates. He was sort of like the class mascot. Everybody loved him. He was a Down syndrome kid, and the school took on. I think he was senior year. He was senior class
President.
homecoming king.
Right.
Things like that. He was one of the guys that everybody looked out for. But I remember vividly in middle school walking, the teacher would send you to the office to pick something up, and there was a little broom closet off on the side of the. If you walk in, there's the front desk, little broom closet straight ahead, and this guy was always sitting in there doing his work. So back then they would just shove him in the broom closet, literally.
Never forget about it.
And I'm sure people like your dad all across this country were instrumental in changing that stuff, to updating the nomenclature, making sure kids weren't shoved in broom closets. So I'm curious now, with that kind of a background, what did your parents think of you wanting to go to professional wrestling?
Like I said, my dad was always supportive on his son following his dream.
Mm-hmm.
First time I saw wrestling was because of him. We were going to watch the Ranger game. The Rangers were snowed out. They're playing the Canadians, and they showed wrestling for Madison Square Garden, and I went nuts. And then literally my father bought me my first wrestling magazine around that time. And
How
then
old were you?
I was 9.
Okay.
And then when I turned 10, he took me to go see wrestling at the Westchester County Center. Bob Backlund was the first wrestler I technically saw. I loved him. Always loved the baby faces, the good guys.
Boo.
And I was hooked. And then Bob Backlund stumped me for an autograph. And then I started not liking wrestling. Then on our spring break, we had a house in Florida, and he took me to see Championship Wrestling from Florida. And I saw Dusty. I was hooked. So he was very, very supportive, and buying me wrestling magazines. And I remember going in a car with my dad, after a baseball game, Little League, I'd be like, Dad, can we go to the wrestling magazine store? And he would take me, he didn't like wrestling, but he loved his son, and so he supported it. My mom she was on the fence with it, and the one deal that they made with me was, if you're going to pursue this, because I started when I was 18, you have to finish college. If you don't finish college, you have to move out, you have to get your own place, you
Right.
want to be a man. It was the proverbial, you live under our rules, our house.
Sure.
That was my only real thing, but they were super duper supportive. ECW, my mom did not like, because I'd always come home with
Welts across your back.
yeah, and like cuts on my forehead and white tape. A lot of times, you know, when Beulah was living there, like I would just stay at her house for a few days, or her apartment,
Yeah.
because I didn't want to go home, because my mom, like, she would like break down crying
Sure.
because she would see her son so beat up, and it was just until I made it to WWE, and then everybody recognized me, or I had an action figure and I'm on, you know, Monday
Yeah.
Night Raw. That's when my mom became fully engrossed with professional wrestling is great,
Yeah.
you know. And also, I mean, ECW, my parents got taken for money when it went out of business, as well as I wasn't making any money in it.
Oh, your parents are invested also?
Well, they were, yeah, man, I was paying everybody's bills. You know,
Wow.
They probably lost about, I think for the bankruptcy hearing, I think we put down for them like 100,000, but I think it was closer like to 2 something.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow. I'm sorry to hear that. Jesus.
My mom is not a fan of Mr. Heyman.
I guess.
Never was, but
Now, with, like, when you were in college and they gave you this edict that, you know, either sink or swim on your own or live under our rules, what, did they have any like, prodding in what you were going to college for?
Nope.
Or was it?
it was just get an education. I have a degree in international business and a minor in law. I'm good at arguing, but I did that because my parents told me. I had no backup plan. It was wrestling 1,000%.
Yeah.
And even like when I first started wrestling, 1989 was my first match. I had 2 matches that year. Johnny Rods was my trainer, and then the next year I had 4 matches. So I'm thinking I'm Joe Pro Wrestler walking around campus, and my father's like, you know, you've had 4 matches this year, and like you would hate me because like I wore like yellow tank top for like Hulk Hogan. I was like such a Guido. I would wear a dress shirt with sweatpants, and but like thinking I'm Joe Pro Wrestler.
Right, right.
And my father's like, how is this a career? And he's like, have you made any money from this? And I was like, no, but I will. And he's
Yeah.
like, it's been a year.
Yeah.
He's like, maybe. And I mean, I was delivering pizza. I had a side job,
Right.
and I was bouncing, but nothing big. And then I'm now 20, still in college. And then Taz was just like, brother, we're going on the road, you know, F Johnny Rods, this is how you do it. And I was his wheelman, and then we hooked up with the Savoldis. And I was on television and have been on television since I was 20 years old until today. I've really not been on television since, which I think is amazing. But it was with the Savoldis, I'd be wrestling every weekend.
Yeah.
And then all I want to do is finish school, because now I'm making like 150 a match, like $300 a weekend.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm on television, and this used to be every Saturday at 5:30, or before the Mets, or after before the Mets games, and that was like prime. I'd be walking around campus, and like everyone would recognize me. It was,
Yeah.
and then I was like, these marks, like unless you were a girl, I didn't care about
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
And I just wanted to finish college so I could go out there. And then like Taz had a try on WCW through Paulie when he was the Tasmanian Devil, and I then was getting, like, I got a tryout with WWE, and like everything was falling into
What
place
year
of how it
was
should
this?
be.
The trial with WWE.
1992, and
So,
I had a
right before
tryout.
SmackDown.
Yeah, I had a tryout. Sergeant Slaughter told me I had a job, and they said I did great. The first night I worked with Brooklyn Brawler. The next night they canceled my match. Marty Jannetty politicked for the Renegade to get a tryout. And then the next night I had another match with Brawler. And yes, I lost to the Brooklyn Brawler in my hometown. And the cool thing is my tryout was at the Westchester County Center.
Nice.
And put over Brooklyn Brawler. And back then it was the tape change match.
Yeah.
And after that, Sarge said, you got a good look. We'll be contacting you within the next So if you don't hear from us, we're on the road. If you don't hear from us for like in the next month, give us a call. And this was right around the steroid trial.
Yeah, okay.
And then I'm waiting like a month, and then I'm nervous, and I'm waiting 6 weeks, and then I call up, and I get, I'm still, hey, my name is Thomas Laughlin, I haven't received my contract, and they're like, who? I was like, Tommy Dreamer, Thomas Laughlin, and like, hold please, and it was Jerry Jarrett, because now he's in charge.
Yeah.
Because Vince kind of wasn't in charge anymore.
Yep.
And I was like, hi, my name's Tommy Dreamer. I had a tryout here, and I was told I was going to have a job, and he was just like, well, I don't know who you are, there's no contract for you. And I was like, no, like Sergeant Slaughter, and like and he's like, well, it's a new regime, and I don't know who you are, so you got to go through the process again. Click, and I was like,
Yeah, wow.
so I didn't work out, but then ECW hit, in the sense of I drove Taz to ECW, and then I've had a job ever since until it went away.
What year did you guys start training? Did you and Taz start training with John?
Taz was a year or two before me. Then he had, shockingly, a little bit of heat with Johnny Rods.
Really?
And then, like I said, my parents always gave me, I had a car and a truck. And Taz, I would always drive. Me and Taz would drive everywhere. And Johnny and Taz had a big fallout again, where we did a show for, Johnny kept saying it was Portland, Maine. And we drove from Middletown, New York, no, Cutchers, New York, to Portland, Maine. We get to the Portland Civic Center, and back then, you just professional wrestling, and you drive to a town, and you'd find the professional wrestling.
Yeah.
And Johnny was like, it was the Portland Civic Center. And it took us 12 hours to get there because it was a really bad snowstorm.
Ooh.
And now you got to try to find, we literally went to the back and it's locked. And Taz like, that son of a bitch ribbed us. And I was like, Johnny wouldn't do that to me. So we call up payphone, we get in touch with the school, and Johnny's like, where are you guys? I'll hold the main event. We'll put you on last. And he's like, we're in Portland, Maine. And he goes, I told you Bangor, Maine. And he's like, no, you didn't. And then like Johnny and Taz are having this FU contest. And then Taz hangs up the phone. He's like, we're going home. And I drove the whole way there. And he slept the whole way home. And I drove, it was 24 hours in the car, and in a blizzard. In my 1988 Mercury Cougar, we saw I saw a trailer with horses go off the road. And I remember like crying, I just want to go home. And that was but it was one of those just moments where like Taz was just like, we're just working, we're not working, you just got to get away,
Yeah.
And he was right, because you do have to wrestle for everybody.
Right.
And there was no, I don't know if him and Johnny spoke after that, but they had some, yeah, they did. They spoke in '95. Johnny kind of did into WWE.
Yeah.
But they had some issues, and I love Johnny. I talked to him usually on his birthday, and he still likes his guys to be his guys and not branch off. And he was like, you get bad habits and stuff, but you have to learn. You got to go out there and learn bad habits and all.
What kind of trainer was he?
He was the best.
Yeah.
He was a shooter for Vince Sr.
Right.
But he wouldn't do he would shoot on you to teach you.
Yeah.
And if you messed up and you got up the wrong way, he'd step on your fingers.
Right.
Not to break your fingers, but he's like, if you break your hand, you can't make money.
Right.
Yeah. That's that generation.
Yeah,
or he would shoot on you and make you work to get out of it.
Right.
And not shoot on you to choke you out. He was the best. And I think about what he did. I would literally watch him, and he was probably in mid-40s. And he would get in the ring with Damien Demento for an hour. He would then wrestle Bill DeMott for 30 minutes, Taz for 30 minutes, and then me for 15, and never get out of that ring.
Yeah.
And he would also he would show you how to work with a guy if the guy was sandbagging you. Mm-hmm. Or he's you pick him up for a body slam and he would go up heavy.
Yeah.
And he's like, this is where you need your strength. You don't need strength in wrestling, but
right.
What if you get a guy, because you could get hurt. And he would always teach you how not to get hurt.
Yeah.
And he's like, accidents are gonna happen, you're going to get hurt, but this is how to prevent it, because you'll get hurt doing something stupid.
Right.
There's no ring steps and you jump down and you're like, oh, my knee.
Yeah.
As opposed to getting up the ring and out of the ring the regular way.
Right.
So he was a great teacher and like literally never got out of the ring to teach his guys. And he has a long list of guys that he trained that made it. Devon, Matt Stryker. He had a little bit with Bubba. He trained Big Dick. He trained a lot of guys that, you know, Angel the Baldies. And
Yeah.
if you back then, and you know this, if like you were trained by Dominic DiNucci, if you were Dominic's guy, you knew that those guys could work
Yeah.
because it was Dominic's name on it.
Right.
And if like, oh, Dominic's guys suck, those guys wouldn't get booked.
Right.
So, but Johnny trained me the right way. It was hard. I remember there'd be times I'd be stuck in traffic on the BQE going home, and I'd be shaking, but it wasn't because I was so physically drained, not beat up.
Right, right. Well, you say it's funny you say about how Johnny would, you know, physically take over in those matches. When I came into the business, I would hear stories of, you know, the older guys that would get in there and like they'd really hurt. You know, like they'd break your leg or your wrist to see you come back for the test. Dominic never did anything like that, but he would, same thing, get you down. You know, the chain wrestling he loved, and he'd get you down clearly 10 steps ahead of you, but he wanted to see you fighting, you know, to get out from underneath that. And then if you were being a little bit cocky or did something, you know, more paying attention, or whatever, he might snatch and take you down, just put an elbow in your cheek.
Yep.
You know, just like, hey, I'm in charge here. Listen up, punk. You know, but those guys, see, that was the
It's a
stuff.
lost generation.
Oh, completely. That's the stuff I grew, you know, breaking into business, heard Dominic and Bruno, and then when I'd be on Dominic shows, guys like Johnny Rods and the Simones talking about this type of thing. You know, the guys that were training in the business and how the business was done. And for me, that was like the biggest letdown getting into wrestling, getting my break in wrestling, was I expected to be more like a fraternity, much like ECW would become all those years later. And instead I saw was backstabbing and lying and, you know, undermining and, you know, things like that, you know, all of the guys, hey, it's just a rib tore me, you know, it's like we're just having fun. And I think that for me was the biggest reason why I was so appreciative, although I'm not nearly as appreciative at the time as I should have been of ECW. I was so nose to the grindstone, worried that if we fuck this show, we might not be here next show. But that was what I really soaked in about ECW was, I know it sounds cliche because fans hear it all the time, right? That we were a family, a fraternity, whatever. But
And a team.
And a team, yeah.
One of my biggest things I hate, and they're saying in the WWE all the time, they'll be like, do you want to make money or do you want to make friends? And I'll be like, you can't, if you're a total dick, you're not going to be over in this business because guys, it's a teamwork. Michael Jordan would not have all those titles without Scottie Pippen.
Correct.
Any team, everybody who wins championships, it's togetherness.
Yes.
And I'm only as good as my opponent.
Amen. Yeah.
And there could be people who are difficult, and I get being, you know, difficult or being strong-willed, but it cannot get over. The only if Vince McMahon deems this, cool, and he's going to pick this guy, but if this guy's having crappy matches and, you know, because guys don't want to work with him, or they just, back in the day, just beat you up.
Right, right.
It's so different. But yes, we had camaraderie, we had a team effort. Shane would go out there. If Shane wasn't in the main event, Shane wanted to be in the main event, but I never held Shane back from being in the main event.
Right.
And it would be like, okay, motherfucker, top that, but like, top that in a good way.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, I just scored a 50-yard touchdown. Next time we get the ball, I'm going to get a 65-yard touchdown.
Right.
If you can equate it to you know, football.
Yeah.
One other thing, like with Johnny, that he did to me, and I wish, you know, and Bubba is a big thing about wrestling schools. My first day, he just said, "Oh, I paid him everything, watch." And I literally sat there and watched. I sat on the bench. I wanted to get in that ring so bad.
Sure, yeah.
And I was like, all right, well, I'm going to be a wrestler. And I stayed there from as soon as it opened to as soon as it closed. And he's like, all right, come back tomorrow. And I was like, that's it?
That's it, yeah.
Next day I come, because back then we only trained Monday, Tuesdays, and some Thursdays. I come back Tuesday, watch. Last maybe hour, he goes, two guys who would wrestle, goes, you know how to be a referee, right? You watch wrestling, right? And I was like, yeah, he was getting to be a ref. And right then and there, he's like, well, you got in the ring wrong. And I was like, well, I'm just getting in the ring how I know. No, I'll teach you that.
Yeah.
But now I'm a referee, and he tells the guys, if I'm in the way, knock me over.
Mm-hmm.
And now I realize how different it is to be going from that seat to now stepping into the ring, and
Right.
just to be a referee. And I'm in the way, and guys are like, get the fuck out of here,
Yeah.
you know? And then he's like, all right, come back Thursday.
Mm.
I come back Thursday, sit there, be a referee, okay, blah, 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 blah. And now I'm like 1 week in, and I'm like, this guy's stealing my money. And then the next week, the same thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, I want to get in. The last day, he's like, all right, get in the ring and take a bump. And I was like, what's a bump?
Yeah.
He goes, fall down. You've been here, haven't you been watching?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah. And I remember that first bump, and I was like, the world is spinning.
Yeah.
And he's like, obviously you're watching, but you're not really watching.
Right.
And right then and there, I was like, this is so much harder.
Yeah.
And then like even show me the proper way to get into the ring. And you know, it's funny when I take these pictures with the fans, you see people struggling to get in the ring. They're like, I
Yeah.
can't believe how hard it is. And like he taught you how to literally crawl
Yeah.
before you could even walk, and walk before you can run. And I've heard stories like, oh yeah, people, my first day of wrestling school, was taught how to do a moonsault. And I was like,
Yeah.
well, that's why, you know, I've been wrestling 31 years. You've been wrestling 30,
This Thanksgiving Day will start my 40th.
holy crap.
Yeah. I was only 11 when I started.
But it's because of how we were taught.
Yeah.
It will always start with your fundamentals. Bottom line. And that's why we've had such lengthy careers, and we still go out there and work as much as we possibly can.
Yeah. Dominic used to say there's 3 rules in wrestling. 1, take care of your opponent. 2, take care of yourself. 3, take care of each other. And, you know, that was drilled into us. Like, it was funny when you said the point about, you know, all you wanted to be was in that ring, right? When you're a kid aspiring to be a professional wrestler, and you're sitting in a school and there's the professional ring right there, it's like you're telling a kid, don't go on the playground,
Yeah.
sit over here on the bench. But the same thing, Dominic had that, and then he had an amateur mat on the side. For the first 6 months, everything was on the amateur
Nice.
mat. We were not allowed into the ring, and finally they allowed us to go in. It was, you know, the same thing, take bumps and teach you the ropes and stuff. Was Johnny, because I know like his position, like, you know, when people say underneath guy, right, or enhancement talent. The enhancement talents were very often the guys that made the stars the stars. Dominic was fantastic at teaching the
Great
amateur
baby
skills.
face.
Yeah, the amateur skills, the chain wrestling. Dominic was not so good at being a storyteller. You know, the higher level stuff that wrestling have morphed into, probably towards the tail end and shortly after his career, you know, in-ring career. Was Johnny much on the storytelling and that?
Johnny was Vince Sr.'s kind of shooter.
Mm-hmm.
And he would get in the ring and see if this guy had what it takes. And Johnny would tell Vince Sr., this guy's not bad, this guy needs work. And like, I remember him and it would always be, and if you think about it, your debut match usually happened at the Garden.
Right.
And it would be against Johnny or Jose later.
Yeah, that's probably, yeah.
But it was Johnny, like Gino Hernandez would come in and work, and Johnny would be like, oh, you know, this guy's cocky, he's got a bit of an attitude, but, and he's only okay in the ring. So
Yeah.
like, he would give that information to Vince Sr. Some guys would make it, and some guys, you know, don't. He would always, you know, Hulk Hogan on a TV match was like, don't hurt me out there, Johnny. And Johnny's like, absolutely not,
Yeah.
you know, because he knew he was going to be the man. I know he got into a shoot with Mike Graham,
Really?
and it was one of his, like, he would go in and pull out the VCR tape, and he knocked out Mike Graham in Madison Square Garden.
Wow, I never knew that. I never heard that story.
Graham, I guess, was a badass shooter,
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
was Johnny.
Yeah.
And they got into it, and then Johnny lightened up, and Johnny does the proverbial. He would always, I would call it the slow old man bump. Like he would like arch, and like you'd be like almost look like Matrix.
Yeah.
And then he'd fall down. So he's shooting with Graham, and he would always like show this. Oh, you want to see when a guy plays with you, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And they're legit fighting.
Yeah.
And then they stop, and then they're working, and then they start fighting again, and it's for the finish. And Johnny, like, he thinks he's gonna like shoot on for the figure 4, and Johnny like gives it to him so gently, and then as like he bends in because he baited him, Johnny, and you see Graham go, as he's putting, and Johnny put the figure 4 on himself, and sit there, and he taps out.
Is that on YouTube?
You could probably, I've seen it before, but he was so proud of that.
I bet.
And then, like, he was like, I know, he goes, it kind of buried me with his old man and go to Florida. But, and it was also, like, cool, too. Like, Johnny was such a good worker. Vince Sr. said, you've been doing jobs here for so long, go to Cali and reinvent yourself. And he went under Arab gimmick as Java Rook, and he became, like, an instant star with Roddy Piper. But his then wife was like, you're living in California, and she basically gave him an ultimatum.
Yeah.
It's either me or the business.
Right.
He chose her, and that marriage didn't work out. He was good to find another wife, but like he basically had to go with his tail tucked between his legs and like not get over and just take that as his spot.
Wow.
Another part, all those guys had like part-time jobs working for the New York Post. Him, S.D. Jones, Jose Estrada. Yep, they all delivered newspapers because it wasn't like how it became where you're on the road. They would do like, and even Bruno told me like how his schedule was. Like, oh, we do Massachusetts, we do the Boston Garden, we do Madison Square Garden, we do Philly, Washington D.C., sometimes Pittsburgh, and then like Allentown or Reading, then Pittsburgh, and then I'd fly to Australia for a month.
Yeah, they do.
And come right back out. So they would do like a week of house shows.
Yeah.
And it was monthly return business.
Right.
And their TVs would take them till the next thing, and I was like, what? Like, and this is Bruno telling me this, and I was like, now it all makes sense how these guys all had real jobs working for the Post and being on TV each and every week. But like then it was the kayfabe. They would take the night shift and work the trucks that threw the papers on the thing, and so they wouldn't get recognized.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it really was an incredible generation of talent. I can't imagine you just saying that, because I'd never known that about Johnny having the opportunity in California.
Yeah.
I always wondered, because you could always tell just by what, even as a kid, now as we're in the business, we can look and really see like what he's doing in the ring.
He worked with Roddy and Chavo Guerrero Sr. And he was getting a push, and Vince Sr. was just like, just stay out there 6 months, a year, and like, he was going to be the new like original Sheik, but he was like Vince's Sheik, because Sheik, obviously you couldn't do business with him because he had his own territory, but they wanted Johnny to be that. Yeah. And he basically had to tuck his tail and
what a shame.
Didn't work out.
To have that skill set, and anybody that's ever bought a pair of boots aspires to be on the top of the card. So I wanted to jump back for a second. You mentioned about Taz having this tryout in WCW because of Paul. Did he know Paul prior to ECW?
No, Paul had gotten on a booking committee back in WCW, and they were all about hiring youth.
Yeah.
And Paul liked Taz, and Taz had a tryout. Then Bill Watts quickly came in, and Taz was too short. For that. He had tryouts with WWE. But Paul always saw something in Taz, just like, this. Paul thought differently, just like Sabu. He saw something different in Sabu, and he saw something different in me, and he was able to pull that out of people. So he was, you look at yourself, like you were this guy who had WCW television. You were like this next, back then they used to deem it the young lions. Yeah. But he was like, no, I'm giving the ball to this guy now. And he let you were pissed off. Yeah. And you did things that nobody did before. You literally talked about what you hated about wrestling. Yeah. Publicly back then, because you you burned bridges. Right. But obviously those bridges opened back up for you because you told the truth.
Well, to me, the whole take on the character, first of all, the whole take on the character itself to me was, if you go out and you look into that camera and you say, Shane does something to kick your ass, well, I don't really believe you're going to kick my ass. I know she's selling the angle. So I never really saw it as burning bridges. I thought it was things that needed to be highlighted about the business, because at that time we had seen the business, ECW, everything is timing, right? So when we look at I always tell people when I'm teaching school in history, all history is current. So you can't look at something 200 years from now and apply today's acumen and say, well, see, these people were bad because today we wouldn't do that. Well, yeah, you're living in a different world back then. But for ECW at the time when the stars just lined up right, that Eddie was in and was out, Todd was there, with the money to fund it, and the talent was there, and the business en masse, WCW and WWF had both gone down. WWF much further to this cartoon land,
Yep.
right? Where guys like our age, if we weren't in the wrestling business, we wouldn't be one to watch, a Doink the Clown or a Dean Douglas or whatever. We'd want to go see Taz kick your ass or whatever. And that was like the timing was so perfect for it. It always makes you wonder.
Wrestling's always been violent.
Yeah.
Like, I remember me and Taz bonded over Larry Zbyszko turning on Bruno,
Yeah.
and Bruno getting hit with a chair and laying in his own blood.
Yeah.
And Taz and I, both like as two separate individuals, I ran up to my television, I punched my television. And Taz goes, brother, I did the same thing. Because I was so, but like,
Yeah.
back then you said it was all cartoonish, all that stuff. Wrestling has always been a violent sport.
Right.
Just like football. Why do we watch football?
Sure.
It's hard-hitting
UFC.
action. Yeah, UFC. And when they went that direction, you were right. It was perfect time, perfect place, and also Paul thinking different. And like for you were, if we compare it today, you were Aleister Black, in the sense of a talent that, God, this guy, like they're grooming him for something. He's
Right.
with Ricky Steamboat. He should be this top guy. How come he's not this top guy? Well, there's a glass ceiling.
Yeah.
And or maybe somebody doesn't like him, something that you have a good body, you're good looking, you can talk. Why isn't he on the top? And then it's like, well, because of politics. So then you came to ECW. Here, say whatever you want.
Yeah. Well, he did that the first night, right? When I had that, not the first night, but the first time I had a promo, a 5-minute
Right.
promo. And 5-minute promo is a pretty good chunk of time. And my music's playing out the closet. I said, what do you want me to say? He went, whatever you want. And it was a little intimidating at first, and then you go out there and start to feel the character, but then I thought, in hindsight especially, looking back, I had a conversation with Paul, and I may not get the names right, but in a nutshell it was, if I had my choice of you, this person, or this person, I would take you. I just figured it's just being nice, right? Because I'm the only guy that's here, these other guys aren't here. But clearly he saw something in me that I could never see myself as a heel, because I'd always been that middle card, white meat baby face. I didn't see, I was never renowned as a promo guy. They didn't give baby faces those kind of promos. And, but in hindsight, looking back at what Paul said to me that day about if I could have this person, or this person, I would take you. I think you're better than this person. I think you're better than this and that person. And I just figured, again, he's being nice about it. But I think that obviously a lot of ingredients. But I think the biggest ingredient that he tapped into was he knew I had been around the business and had a gullet full of politics. And just the ridiculousness of it and how, the Dusty Rhodes used to say it's about putting asses in seats, right? Well, if you can put asses in seats, why am I going to do this to you and push you down the ladder, so to speak? But in those early days of ECW, like when Taz came in, it was the Tasmaniac gimmick, and you came in, and do you remember our conversations? You would come to me and ask me certain questions about getting over, and
you were my first star. You were my first feud in ECW.
Yeah.
But also, like, I knew you were a great worker, but like, yes, I wanted to sponge off of you.
Sure.
And I also remember you like, well, I'm kind of new to this, but if I was a babyface, because you were a great babyface, and I was like, okay, great. I remember a lot. I remember so much, and you and I have been interwoven forever.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing too, and with Paul, like starting out, I'll tell you how I look at him. When he started this new thing called ECW, he went with the veteran who gave us all credibility in Terry Funk.
Right.
He went with this guy who had face value, but wasn't pushed, and like was in his prime. It was you.
Yeah.
He had this tag team that like no one ever heard of, but they were different than the Public Enemy.
Yep.
And he had this one guy who was just so different, like Sabu. Those were his five, and then His other crew was Taz, the Sandman, Tommy Dreamer,
Right.
and whoever else. Like, these are my up and comers. And like with you weren't ready yet. Who'd he do? He put you with Sherry.
Yeah.
Then he put you with Mr. Hughes.
Yeah.
You were his steak, and he gave you like all these different things that made you better.
Right.
Another thing, and I don't know if I've ever told you this. I remember we pulled up in a building, and you had your hair slicked back, you had a ponytail, you were standing next to Francine, you were freaking jacked, you had that chain around your neck, and Paul, we were in the car, and he goes, look at him. He goes, that's what a champion looks like. My God. He goes, no, seriously. He was like, that's what my champion looks like. And it was just like one of these moments where like I looked at you too, and like I was like, all right, Paul, but like I was like, he looks like such a star.
Yeah.
And Paul's like, that's what I need all the time. He's like, God, like he was reveling in you,
Yeah.
and then you like came up and you like probably chewing dip, and you're like, hey, or fart on him. But like for that moment, I saw his vision through
Yeah.
his eyes, because he was like breath taken away with just your appearance.
Yeah.
And that's the old Vince, perception is reality.
Right.
When you look like a star, you conduct yourself like a star, you're going to become a star. And
Right.
you were such a cornerstone for what became ECW, because of you didn't give a shit about what you said, but also because you experienced it. Same
Yeah.
like what he did with Steve Austin. Like what you're
Right.
telling me, Steve was pissed. He got fired from WCW while he was hurt. Paul goes, here's a microphone.
Yeah.
Go talk.
Yeah.
And he was a guy who never got the opportunity to talk.
Right. Go figure, right?
And he was like, okay. And then his career worked out pretty well for him
Yeah.
too.
I'm curious, and as you're saying this, I'm running through my head, and I've mentioned this multiple times in interviews. If you look back at my career from Dominic and Bruno and then to Bill Watts and Eddie Gilbert, and at each place there were these key facets that were there. So like when you say Paul pulled him and saw me there, so that's what the champion looks like. For the guys like you and Taz and Sabu that didn't have that time out on the road, like what was your reference points? Like to me, if I would go blank in the ring, I would stop and think, what would Bruno do right now? Or what would Eddie Gilbert do right now? And I could quickly get back on track. Like, what was your reference, you guys' reference points? Because all of you became pretty damn outstanding talents, right? So we had this crew of talent, like me and Raven and Funk had the experience. Then we had a crew of guys that literally nobody had ever really heard of on the national level, but would very soon be major stars in the business.
For me, and you knew this when I first started, I was struggling to try to get over.
Yeah.
And the beauty of ECW, like, Sandman wasn't getting over. He was that horrible fucking
surfer
gimmick.
Yeah.
He's in the back. I remember this like yesterday. Me, Taz, Paulie are sitting there. And I'm not friends with Paulie. Like, he's just a guy I work for.
Yeah.
Sandman has his wetsuit down around his knees.
Yes.
He's in boxers, no shirt, smoking a cigarette, drinking, being loud, and entertaining all the boys.
Yeah.
And Taz goes, that's what you should put on TV. I go, dude, that would draw $1 million. And Paul goes, you're right. And then the birth of the Sandman.
Yeah.
For me, I'm struggling to get over it. And Taz goes to Paul. I mean, again, like I kicked out of Jimmy Snuka. Splash, first person history, do it. Taz like, dude, this kid has it, and this kid is tough. Trust me, all these suplexes I practice, I dump him on his head all the time, and he keeps getting up.
Yeah.
And he goes, he's tough. And Paul was just like, I have to think of a way to make the fans know he's tough.
Right.
For me, what was my reference point was trying so hard to get over, but not letting the fans down.
Yeah.
Like when I got caned, that was a defining moment in my career and life.
Yeah.
I did not want to get up because it hurt so bad. If this was happening to me right now, I wouldn't get up, but I couldn't let the fans down.
Right.
And I could literally see the same people that would boo me, or I'd put my hand out to high five and they'd pull it away, were like the first one cheered, the second one, that same person who hated me was like, Tommy, just stay down. And then like by the sixth one, they were like, Tommy, just stay down. I was like, I can't let you down. And the guy's like, why? And like, I watched people embrace me.
Sure. Yeah.
And it was just like, I'm getting goosebumps. So it's the biggest drug.
Yeah. Yes.
And like Thomas Laughlin, but Tommy Dreamer could not let the fans down.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it. And that was like my reference point. And then like me and Raven, like half the stuff that we did, as you know, I'm a big wrestling fan. Like pile driving Beulah. That was all Jerry Lawler stuff back in Memphis, and we just added like a twist to it. But it was just like, for me, like, you had this quest to show you were the best and be the champion, and then once you're the champion, I wanted to stay the champion.
Right.
But, and you know, your money is also different. It wasn't like we had guarantees, you know, we were working for the house. But for me, it was just, I could not let you down, because then I would be like, oh, they won't like me anymore.
Right.
And then once, and I remember, forget this, when I hit the pose in the crowd, and after me and Raven, Apollo drove Beulah, I come in the back, half bloody. Paulie embraced me like a father to a son, like the old Kramer versus Kramer when we're running. And he hugs me, he's like, and he's holding me, he's like, you did it. And I'm like, get off me, what did I do? And he goes, you're over.
Yeah.
And he goes, you will never not be over unless you disappoint them. Never disappoint them.
Yeah.
And that resonated with me.
Sure.
But like, and he showed, another thing, like he showed you throwing down the title. He showed me in the crowd doing that pose, because these are moments in your life, but he made the fans remember it.
Yeah.
And he was right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't pain me to say it. He was right about so much.
Yeah.
And me and, like, you know, Bubba will joke about if, like, he's almost like Darth Vader. If he would just use his powers for good, it would be so great. But I mean, he taught us all, like each and every one of us, so much about being ourselves, and then that wisdom you get from Johnny, from, you know, Dominic, from things that you learn. And then it's just over and over experience. You're able to just apply it, and, you know, now that you're at the age, you're trying to help other people in life, just because I want to see everybody make it. I really do.
The thing that, I mean, obviously the beating itself was so violent and vicious that the fans could feel that and were along with it. But to me, the thing that made that work was that it was forever.
Oh yeah.
You know, it wasn't like 10
and it felt like forever.
I bet.
It was actually 12 shots I had to take.
It was 12. So it wasn't like it was like 12 shots in 30 seconds and you were out of the ring and onto the next.
I took 10 and then I got in his face. I remember his lower lip was like this because he was so emotional.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm never going to give up. I'm never going to give up. And I turned around and he whacked me again and whacked me.
Yeah.
And even like Nancy, like, you know, she was there and she was like, come on, Dreamer, playing her role. And like, she would turn away and she'd be like, Tommy, you okay?
Yeah.
And I was just like, I'm selling. I was like, no,
right.
You know, but I had to get up. And I know it sounds cliche, but how do you, if I would have just went, no, I'm sorry, I would have turned the biggest heel in the business, but it would never have made my career. And that was like such a defining moment. You think about, literally, in the history of business, not one person kicked out of Jimmy Snuka's splash. I did, but people talk about the caning as opposed to that.
Sure.
It's just
next level. You know, and you look at it, the thing that always amazes me is how the fans never forget, right? So
thank God.
They could be 50 years from now and they're going to remember the caning that you took that originally got you over with them. And they become part of the legend that is Tommy Dreamer, right? So that's where the legend, mine starts with the belt throwdown. Not starts, but that's a big part of it. Yours was the caning that showed that crowd. Because I remember before that, you were that sort of
it was a beautiful baby
pretty boy,
gorgeous,
right? Pretty
till
boy,
this mess,
big head of hair, right? And the Philadelphia fans were going to despise that until they saw, oh, this pretty boy's got a heart, right? He's got a backbone.
And Philly was the perfect place for all of the ECW.
Yeah.
And it was the right place, right time. And honestly, today we're filming this. We did an autograph session today. People brought the NWA title, and like, to Shane, it's an honor to have you sign this, blah, blah, blah. For me, they're bringing up Singapore Canes.
Yeah.
And I know, just like him, my body of work worked because, like you said, they're not coming up and giving me a WWE magazine.
Right.
I technically was in the WWE longer than I was in ECW.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
And they're still remembering our work from back then. And, you know, I made the joke of somebody asked him to sign the NWA title. I was like, oh, be careful, he'll throw it down. And the guy goes, oh, no, I know he will. And I was just like, or people coming up and talking to us where I'm like, this kid's obviously 25 years old.
Right.
And he's like, I love ECW. I was like, okay, you were 5 when we went out of business, so we live on forever. We're getting wrapped up here. Your agent is yelling at us.
Well, we just scratching the surface.
Well, I'll come back.
Together, we'll definitely do another casting session here.
Always.
Because, anyway, great pleasure to have Tommy Dreamer with us here today, and look forward to number 2, maybe 3 or 4, and talking with him.
We can talk forever.
Appreciate you guys being here, man.